Hey, we wrap up the week with talking about this intimate walk with God and how there has to be the priority of love. It's so interesting to me that in many ways this thing that Jesus calls us to, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. It's love. It's love. The greatest command is love God, love others. This new command that I give you, love as I have loved you. We love because he first loved us. I mean, the scriptures just go on and on and on about this thing called love. There is a thing called love. And if you're not dialed into that, you're going to miss the mark. So let's hit the mark. Let's hit the target. Let's hit the bullseye. An intimate walk with God is about cultivating, staying with, investing in this love relationship. Vertically, and the overflow of that horizontally. So here's a couple ways to do that. So I said that this last week, two things, Kennedy. One is to practice his presence, and then practice doing the next right thing. Practice his presence, practice doing the next right thing. So it comes out of, verse 10. Jesus says, if you love me, you will, 15:10, John 15:10. If you love me, you will obey what I command. If you love me, you will obey what I command. In John 14, Jesus said essentially that very same thing 3 times in the previous chapter. Then he says it again in John 15. Why? Because he wasn't beating a dead horse. He was trying to raise us from our dead lives. He's trying to breathe life into us, knowing that love brings life. His love poured into us brings life. And he wants us to have life and life to the full. And that happens when we are abiding in him and living out a love relationship with God and others. So this practicing his presence really is about paying attention to being the recipient. Practicing his presence is about seeking to be a healthy recipient of his love. I can't give away what I don't have. You can't either. You can't give what you don't have. So when some people are trying to, they're trying to white knuckle their way through a relationship, and they're trying to be kind, they're trying to love, and they're just exhausted, and they just feel so defensive, and they kind of say, why don't you give what I'm giving you? And I've been doing all the giving. Whenever you're kind of tracking your giving, you're giving out of your flesh, not out of the spirit. When you're keeping, account of who's done the most in the relationship, what you're doing, the effort you're making is flesh effort. That's not the effort we're talking about. We're talking about effort out of the Spirit, effort out of God's presence. That's where the fuel for that effort comes from him. And so when I practice his presence, I absorb him. He's the fuel that gives the energy to now love others, to obey, to do the next right thing. C.S. Lewis said it beautifully. He said, God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn. There is no other. That's why it's just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering with him. There is no happiness without him. There isn't. I love that because when I see him as the fuel, when I see him as the resource of love, and I take it in, I can much more readily give it out. He's the one energizing my effort. I'm not white-knuckling the effort. I'm depending on his presence. But that means I've got to shift out of my self-filled perspective to a God-filled perspective. out of my agenda to his agenda, out of my will to his will, out of willfulness to willingness. When that begins to happen, all of a sudden there's a new cadence and rhythm, and I'm able to love with a lot of endurance. I'm able to give and not keep tabs on whether they're given back to me. I don't have to tally the score to see who's given the most, because it was never about that. If it is for you, then the effort isn't spirit-filled effort. It's flesh-filled effort. So just agree with me. Lord Jesus, when we remain in you, we don't remain in a white-knuckling relationship. We remain in a hands-open, surrendered relationship where we are learning to trust and depend on you. Lord, fill us with your presence. Be our fuel. Energize us today to love a little more like you. I'll see you tomorrow.